It was one of those nights when Hollywood felt alive again. The bright lights of Los Angeles shimmered over the studio, and fans lined up outside, hoping to catch a glimpse of the stars entering the building. Jimmy Kimmel Live was known for surprises, laughter, and moments that made the internet buzz for days. But no one standing in that line, or even working inside the studio, could have guessed that this would be a night people would still be talking about years later. Inside the studio, the mood was light and electric. The audience clapped and cheered as Jimmy's warm-up comedian cracked jokes to get everyone in the right mood. Cameras were being checked, lights adjusted, and producers moved back and forth, headsets on, making sure every detail was perfect. They had a special guest tonight, Clint Eastwood, the legendary actor and filmmaker who had been part of Hollywood for over half a century. Everyone knew Clint wasn't just a movie star. He was an icon. His westerns, his tough guy roles, his directing. He was a man who had done it all. He had a calm presence that made people quiet down when he entered a room. And though he didn't appear on late-night shows often anymore, when he did, he brought with him a sense of old Hollywood charm and mystery that few could match. Jimmy Kimmel was excited but also a little nervous. He was used to joking around with guests, poking fun at them and getting big laughs from his audience. It was part of what made his show popular. But Clint was a different kind of guest. He wasn't the type to laugh just to be polite, and everyone knew he could hold his ground. Backstage, Clint was getting ready quietly. He didn't need makeup or a mirror surrounded by lights. He sat calmly in a simple chair, sipping water, talking softly with one of the producers. He looked exactly like people remembered him. Sharp eyes, weathered face, and that slow, measured way he moved, like someone who had seen it all and didn't need to prove anything anymore. When the stage manager gave the 5-minute warning, Jimmy walked past Clint's room and peeked in. "Hey, Clint," he said with his usual grin. "Ready to have some fun?" Clint looked up, gave a half-smile, and said, "Always ready." Jimmy laughed nervously. He could tell Clint wasn't joking, but he wasn't being cold either. That was just Clint, calm, collected, and impossible to read. The show began with the usual energy. Jimmy came out, cracked a few jokes about the latest celebrity news, made the crowd laugh, and then teased the upcoming guest. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "tonight we have a true legend in the building. The man who taught generations how to squint, speak softly, and still scare everyone in the room. The one and only Clint Eastwood." The audience erupted in applause. People stood up and cheered as the camera zoomed in on Clint walking out onto the stage. He didn't wave or make big gestures. He simply walked with that slow, confident stride, nodded at Jimmy, and took his seat. From the first few moments, everyone could sense the difference. Most guests came on excited, talking fast, trying to be funny. Clint sat there relaxed, leaning slightly back, his hands resting calmly. When Jimmy thanked him for being there, Clint nodded. "Glad to be here," he said in his quiet, deep voice. Jimmy smiled. "You know, Clint, I was thinking earlier today, you've been in Hollywood longer than some of our audience members have been alive. You've seen this industry change completely." Clint looked at him, smiled faintly, and said, "It's changed, sure, but some things don't change, that people still like a good story." The audience clapped and Jimmy nodded. "That's true. You've given us plenty of good stories, and both on screen and off. But tell me, do you ever get tired of people quoting your lines? You know, all the make my day stuff?" Clint chuckled softly. "No, not really. If people still remember something you did 40 years ago, that's not a bad thing." The audience laughed, but Jimmy saw an opening. He leaned forward with a grin. "You know, I tried doing that squint thing you do in front of the mirror once. I just looked like I needed glasses." Clint smiled. "Maybe you do." The crowd burst out laughing. Jimmy laughed too, pretending to wipe a tear from his eye. Okay, I walked into that one." The mood was light, friendly, but then Jimmy decided to push a little more, as he always did. That was his style, after all. "You've made so many great films, Clint," he said. "But now that you're, well, let's just say at a certain age, do you still find it easy to remember all your lines?" The audience laughed, expecting Clint to play along. But Clint didn't answer right away. He just looked at Jimmy for a few seconds, tilting his head slightly. The silence stretched long enough for everyone to notice. Then, with perfect timing, Clint said, "I remember mine better than you remember your jokes." The entire room exploded with laughter. Even the cameraman couldn't hold steady for a moment. Jimmy laughed too, a little louder than usual, trying to keep the flow going. "You've still got it," he said. Clint shrugged. "You don't lose it if you never fake it." The audience clapped again, louder this time. It was clear that Clint wasn't there just to be teased. He was sharp, funny in his own quiet way, and absolutely in control. Jimmy moved to the next segment, but his usual rhythm was slightly off now. He made a few jokes about Clint's cowboy movies, imitating his tough voice. "You know," Jimmy said in a mock-serious tone, "I grew up watching you. I used to pretend to be you. My mom said if I didn't stop talking like that, she'd ground me." Clint smiled politely. "She probably should have." The audience howled. Jimmy threw up his hands. All right, I see how this is going." But even as everyone laughed, people in the audience started to sense something. Clint wasn't just being funny, he was teaching a quiet lesson. He was showing that confidence doesn't need volume, that you don't have to shout to make people listen. His calmness, his pauses, and his words had more power than any punchline. Behind the cameras, producers were exchanging glances. They loved it. The chemistry between Clint and Jimmy was gold. Two different generations of entertainment meeting head-on, and the older one clearly leading the dance. Jimmy tried again, playfully. "So Clint, you've been acting, directing, producing, probably even scaring a few studio executives along the way. What keeps you going? Most people your age are retired and playing golf." Clint looked at him calmly. "I tried golf once," he said. "Too slow." The laughter rolled through the room again. Jimmy leaned in, smiling. "Too slow, you? I can't imagine you being in a hurry." Clint nodded slowly. "No hurry, just purpose." Something in his tone made the room go quiet for a moment. Clint wasn't joking that time. He was saying something deeper, and even Jimmy felt it. Jimmy looked at him impressed. "That's a good answer," he said. "Purpose." "I like that," Clint smiled faintly. "You should try it." The crowd lost it again. Even Jimmy couldn't stop laughing this time. "I walked right into that one too," he said, shaking his head. "You're dangerous, Clint." Clint leaned back in his chair, smiling. That's what they used to say. The audience loved every second of it. It wasn't a loud, crazy interview filled with shouting or gimmicks. It was two people talking, one trying to be funny, the other effortlessly showing how real humor and confidence come from experience. As the segment went on, Jimmy tried to regain control of the conversation. He asked about Clint's new project, his approach to directing, and how he managed to stay creative for so long. Clint gave thoughtful answers, occasionally slipping in a dry one-liner that kept everyone laughing. When Jimmy asked what advice he'd give young filmmakers, Clint said, "Stop worrying about what people will think. Just make the movie. If you wait for approval, you'll never start." It wasn't meant as a joke, but people clapped anyway. His words carried weight. As they neared the commercial break, Jimmy smiled and said, "You know, I think I need to take you with me every night. You could be my co-host." Clint smiled slowly. "You couldn't afford me." The room roared again. Jimmy laughed so hard he almost missed the cue for the break. As the music played and they cut to commercials, the audience continued clapping, some even standing up. Backstage, the crew exchanged excited whispers. Everyone could feel it. This wasn't just another interview. This was one of those rare moments where two worlds met. And the old one reminded the new one how it's really done. When the cameras went off, Jimmy turned to Clint and said, "You really got me out there." Clint smiled. "Just keeping you sharp." Jimmy laughed and shook his hand. "You did more than that. You destroyed me in the best way possible." Clint nodded. All in good fun. It was simple, but the sincerity in his tone said it all. He hadn't meant to embarrass anyone or show off. It was just his natural way, quiet, quick-witted, and real. That night, when the show aired, social media lit up almost instantly. Viewers couldn't get enough of Clint's comebacks and calm confidence. Clips spread everywhere with captions like "Clint Eastwood still the coolest man alive," and "Jimmy Kimmel got owned," respectfully. But in that moment, sitting in the studio with the lights dimming and the audience still buzzing, no one was thinking about the internet or trending videos. They were thinking about what they'd just witnessed. A living legend who didn't need to shout, didn't need to prove anything, yet completely owned the room with a few perfectly timed words. And that was just the beginning. The night after the show aired, everyone in the city seemed to be talking about the same thing: Clint Eastwood's appearance on Jimmy Kimmel Live. It wasn't because of a scandal, or a big announcement, or even a movie promotion. It was because of how Clint had handled himself. calm, funny, and sharp in a way that left people both laughing and thinking. Clips of the interview had gone viral overnight, with millions of views pouring in within hours. People on social media couldn't get enough of it. There were comments like, "This is how real men handle interviews," and "Clint didn't say much," but every word hit like a punch. Even younger viewers who didn't grow up watching his movies found themselves impressed. There was something magnetic about how he had spoken. Never raising his voice, never trying too hard. Just being completely in control of every moment. Inside the show's office the next morning, Jimmy's team was buzzing. The producers were thrilled with the reaction. The video had become one of their highest viewed segments in months. Jimmy himself was still smiling about it. He loved moments that got people talking, and even though he had been on the receiving end of some sharp comebacks, he admired Clint's effortless humor. Still, a small part of him wanted a rematch, just one more chance to balance things out. He joked with his staff, "Next time Clint comes on, I'm wearing a bulletproof vest. That man's words are dangerous." Everyone laughed, but they all knew Clint's appearance had raised the bar. For Clint, the reaction didn't change much. He didn't even have social media, and he wasn't the type to check online comments. That morning he went about his routine like always, waking early, taking a quiet walk near his ranch, and later heading to his small office where he worked on his upcoming film project. When one of his assistants mentioned that he was trending, Clint just smiled. "Trending?" he asked with a half laugh. "I didn't even know I was climbing anything." The assistant laughed too. "You kind of roasted Jimmy last night." "People loved it," Clint nodded slowly. "I wasn't roasting him. I was just talking, and that was the truth." Clint hadn't gone on the show with a plan to outshine anyone. He simply responded honestly, with his own kind of quiet humor that came from years of living, observing, and understanding people. But honesty has a way of standing out, especially in a world where most people try too hard to impress. As the days passed, news outlets began writing about the exchange. Headlines read, "Clint Eastwood teaches a masterclass in confidence on live TV," and "Jimmy Kimmel left speechless by Hollywood legend." Late-night fans debated who had won the moment, though most agreed Clint's natural composure made him unforgettable. Back at the studio, Jimmy decided to address it on his next show. When he walked out to greet the audience, he couldn't help but smile as people started shouting Clint's name. Yeah, I know," he said, laughing. "He destroyed me. I admit it." The audience laughed too. "Let's just say I learned something that night. Never try to outcool Clint Eastwood. It's impossible." That self-aware moment made the audience cheer. Even though Jimmy had been teased, he took it in good humor. He played a short clip from the interview, the part where Clint calmly said, "I remember mine better than you remember your jokes." The crowd roared again. Jimmy laughed along and said, "See? I can't even get mad." That was brilliant. The producers noticed that the replay brought in another spike in views. People loved seeing the mutual respect between the two men. It wasn't just about jokes. It was about timing, tone, and personality. It reminded viewers that you didn't have to be loud or flashy to make an impact. Meanwhile, Clint went back to his work quietly. He had always believed in doing things for the right reasons, not for fame or attention. He spent his days reviewing scripts, meeting a few close friends for lunch, and sometimes just driving through town in his old truck. Every so often, someone would stop him to say they saw him on the show and loved how he handled himself. He would just smile politely, thank them, and continue on his way. One afternoon, while sitting outside a cafe, Clint overheard two younger men talking at a nearby table. They were discussing the show, laughing about his one-liners. One of them said, "Man, that guy didn't even raise his voice once, but he completely owned it." The other nodded. "Yeah, it's like he didn't need to try." "That's real confidence," Clint smiled to himself. He didn't interrupt, didn't introduce himself, just finished his coffee quietly. Moments like that reminded him why he had stayed in the business so long. Not for the fame, but for the connection. When people remembered something you said, it meant you'd spoken truthfully. A few weeks later, Jimmy's team reached out again. They wanted to invite Clint back for another interview, maybe even a special episode where they could revisit the moment and have a longer conversation about his career. The producers hoped for another viral clip, but they also genuinely wanted to celebrate Clint's legendary status. When Clint got the call, he laughed softly. "You really want me to come back and pick on him again," he said. The producer chuckled and replied, "Only if you want to." Clint didn't give an answer right away. He thought about it for a few seconds and said, "I'll think about it. Maybe when I've got something new to say." That was typical of him. No rush, no pressure, just taking things at his own pace. Jimmy, on the other hand, mentioned Clint again in a later episode. "We tried to get Clint back on the show," he said jokingly, "but I think he's still letting me recover." The audience laughed, but there was genuine admiration in Jimmy's tone. He often spoke about how much he respected guests who were real, who didn't come on just to promote something but to have an honest conversation. Clint had done exactly that. As the months passed, that interview continued to circulate online. People made short edits of it, turning Clint's lines into quotes over dramatic background music. It became a kind of motivational moment for many, a reminder that age doesn't dull your mind or your spirit if you stay true to yourself. But what most people didn't see was the quiet side of that story. A few days after the show, Jimmy had written Clint a personal note. In it, he thanked him for being part of the program and for making the night so memorable. He admitted that Clint had taught him something valuable, that real humor doesn't come from trying too hard, but from being genuine. Clint received the note and smiled as he read it. He wrote a short reply on the same card. "It's all in good fun. Keep laughing." He sent it back with no fuss, no signature flourish, just that simple line. Jimmy kept it in his office drawer ever since. For both men, that night became more than a viral clip. It was a small reminder that even in an industry full of scripts and rehearsed moments, authenticity still mattered. People could feel it when someone was real. They could sense when someone spoke from experience, not ego. In the weeks that followed, other talk shows started referencing the moment too. Some hosts joked about inviting Clint on just to see what he'd say to them. Others discussed how it was one of the best live TV moments of the year. A few even said it felt like watching an old-school Hollywood star remind everyone what presence truly means. Meanwhile, Clint continued living simply. He still directed, still acted occasionally, still spoke softly and walked slowly, but every move carried purpose. Whenever someone mentioned the interview to him, he would smile and say, "It was a fun night." He never made more of it than that. That was the thing about Clint. He never chased the spotlight, yet it always found him. He didn't need to raise his voice to be heard, and he didn't need to dominate a room to own it. His confidence wasn't loud, it was steady. It came from knowing who he was, from years of standing his ground when it mattered, and from never pretending to be anything else. For Jimmy, the experience left a lasting mark too. He began approaching interviews a little differently after that, with more curiosity, less force. He realized that sometimes the best moments came from silence, from listening, from letting a guest's energy fill the space. One night, months later, he mentioned Clint again during a monologue. "You know," he said with a grin, "Clint Eastwood doesn't just make movies, and he makes people rethink their whole approach to life. I tried being calm like him for one day. I lasted 20 minutes. The audience laughed, but there was a warmth behind the joke. The respect between them was clear. Years later, when people looked back at the clip, it still felt fresh. It wasn't about insults or showmanship. It was about wit, timing, and truth. Two people from different generations had shared a stage, and somehow, instead of clashing, they created a moment that everyone could enjoy. Even now, people who rewatch it say the same thing. That Clint Eastwood didn't just make Jimmy Kimmel laugh. He made everyone watching realize that real charm doesn't fade. It only gets stronger with age. Like a good story that's told one more time and somehow feels new again. And for Clint, that was the beauty of it all. He didn't set out to make headlines. He didn't plan to go viral or make a statement. He simply showed up, spoke honestly, and reminded the world that sometimes the funniest, most powerful thing you can do is just be yourself. After the famous interview night, months passed quietly, but the memory of Clint Eastwood's appearance on Jimmy Kimmel Live refused to fade. It kept coming back on social media feeds, late-night TV highlight reels, and best-of compilations. Every few weeks, the clip would resurface with new captions like, "The legend outsmarts the host," or, "This is how you handle an interview like a pro." For Clint, none of that mattered much. He didn't spend his time scrolling online. Instead, he was deep into his next film project, working behind the camera this time. He had always said that directing was where he truly felt free. Acting was about playing someone else. Directing was about shaping the truth. On one quiet morning, he sat at a small wooden desk going over the script. Sunlight came through the window, lighting up the notes he had written in pencil. He was alone except for his assistant, who occasionally brought him coffee. There was a knock at the door. "You've got a call from the studio," the assistant said. "They're asking if you'll attend the late-night awards event next week. They said Jimmy Kimmel's hosting again." Clint smiled softly and shook his head. "Hosting again, huh? The guy doesn't rest," the assistant laughed. "They really want you there. It's an award for lifetime achievement. They said it would mean a lot if you could show up." Clint leaned back, thinking. He had never cared much about awards, but he respected the people who worked hard behind the scenes. The crew, the camera operators, the writers. They were the ones who kept the industry moving. "All right," he said after a pause. "I'll go." The news spread quickly that Clint would be attending the event. Fans were excited. People still remembered how effortlessly he had handled Jimmy on live TV, and now they were eager to see the two share a stage again. Jimmy himself heard the news and immediately smiled when his producer told him. "Clint's coming? Oh, this is going to be good," he said. "I promise I'll behave this time." The producer laughed. "Maybe he'll roast you again," Jimmy grinned. "I'm bringing extra jokes, just in case." When the night of the event finally arrived, the city sparkled with flashing lights and red carpets. Famous faces filled the hall, and the air was filled with that mix of excitement and nervousness that only live events could bring. Cameras lined the entrance as celebrities stopped for interviews, smiling and waving to the fans gathered outside. Inside, Clint arrived quietly. No entourage, no big entrance. He wore a simple black suit and walked with that same unhurried calm that everyone recognized. People greeted him warmly, some shaking his hand, others just nodding respectfully as he passed. Even younger actors who had grown up watching him couldn't help but stare a little. When Jimmy spotted him from across the room, he laughed under his breath. "Here comes trouble," he said jokingly to his co-host backstage. "If he decides to talk again, I'm letting him take over." The ceremony began with the usual excitement, music, laughter, and award after award being handed out. Jimmy kept the mood light with his trademark humor, teasing some of the nominees, cracking jokes about Hollywood's obsession with remakes, and even poking fun at himself for being the guy who got schooled by Clint Eastwood. The audience laughed, and Clint, sitting in the front row, smiled quietly. As the night went on, it became clear that the moment everyone was waiting for was Clint's appearance on stage. His Lifetime Achievement Award was scheduled near the end, the grand highlight of the evening. The crowd whispered with anticipation, knowing that whatever happened, it was going to be special. Finally, Jimmy took the microphone again. "All right, ladies and gentlemen," he said with a grin, "the moment we've all been waiting for. Tonight we honor a man who doesn't just make movies. He makes history. He's been a cowboy, a detective, a director, a legend, and last time he came on my show, he also became my personal comedy teacher. Please welcome Mr. Clint Eastwood." The audience stood up instantly, clapping and cheering as Clint walked to the stage. Jimmy extended his hand and Clint shook it firmly. For a second, they exchanged that same knowing look they'd shared months earlier, a mix of respect and amusement. Clint stood at the podium as the crowd quieted down. He looked out over the room, eyes moving slowly across the faces of actors, filmmakers, and crew members who had grown up watching him. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm but carried clearly. "Thank you," he said simply. "I never thought much about awards. I just like telling stories." The audience clapped, but Clint held up a hand gently, signaling that he wasn't done. "I've been lucky to work in this business for a long time," he continued. "Long enough to see cameras change, faces change, even the way stories are told change. But one thing hasn't changed. People still want honesty. Whether you're making a film or hosting a show, people can feel it when you're being real." Jimmy smiled from his place at the side of the stage. He knew those words weren't just about movies, Clint went on. You can have all the effects, all the fancy tricks, all the noise. But if there's no truth in it, it disappears as soon as the lights go out. What lasts is the feeling. That's what people remember. The audience listened in silence. Even the cameras seemed to move slower, as if not to break the moment. Clint paused, then glanced toward Jimmy. "And sometimes," he said with a faint smile, "you go on a talk show thinking you'll just chat for a bit, and you end up teaching the host a lesson without meaning to. The crowd erupted in laughter. Jimmy laughed the loudest, shaking his head and clapping. "He's doing it again," he shouted playfully. Clint chuckled softly. "But to be fair," he continued, "he gave me a good laugh too. And in this world, that's worth more than any award." The applause grew even louder. People stood, clapping and cheering. It wasn't just a celebration of Clint's career. It was a celebration of what he represented. Strength without arrogance, wisdom without preaching, humor without cruelty. As Clint finished his speech, he turned to Jimmy, who walked back on stage with a grin. "I think we're even now," Jimmy said. Clint smiled. "I think you're still catching up." The crowd howled again. The moment was perfect and playful but full of respect. The two men hugged briefly before leaving the stage together, still laughing as they went backstage. After the show, people gathered around Clint, shaking his hand and thanking him for his words. Jimmy joined him later in the dressing room, still in high spirits. "You've got this magic, Clint," he said. "Every time you talk, people listen. I think you could read the phone book and make it sound wise." Clint laughed. "It's not magic, Jimmy, it's just being comfortable in silence." Jimmy tilted his head. "What do you mean?" Clint leaned back in his chair. "Most people rush to fill the silence. They think if they stop talking, they'll lose attention. But silence isn't the enemy. It's where the truth comes in. You wait, you think, you speak only when it matters." Jimmy nodded slowly, taking it in. "That's actually really good advice," Clint smiled. "You can use it on your show. Just don't give me credit," Jimmy laughed. "I wouldn't dare." The two men talked for a while longer, sharing stories about Hollywood, about the pressures of always being on, and about how sometimes the simplest things, a look, a pause, a real laugh, carried more power than any planned joke. Later that night, as Clint left the building, a few young crew members stopped him by the door. "Mr. Eastwood," one of them said shyly, "that speech meant a lot. I'm just starting in this business, and I hope I can do it the way you do someday." Clint smiled warmly. "Just stay curious," he said. "That's the secret." He shook their hands, then walked out into the cool night air, where the noise of the event faded behind him. Jimmy stood near the stage entrance, watching as Clint's car drove away. He turned to his producer and said quietly, "That man doesn't just talk, he teaches without even trying." The producer nodded. "It's like everything he says sticks." "Yeah," Jimmy said, smiling. "And he doesn't even have to raise his voice." Over the next few days, clips from the award show spread online just like before. People quoted Clint's lines again, turning them into little life lessons. "People still want honesty" became one of the most shared phrases of the week. But beyond the viral fame, there was something deeper about that night. It wasn't just another celebrity event. It was a reminder of what made Clint Eastwood timeless. He didn't perform. He connected. He didn't chase laughter. He earned it. And even Jimmy, known for his sharp humor, learned that night that sometimes the best joke isn't the one that makes people laugh the loudest. It's the one that makes them think long after the laughter fades. When Clint got home later that week, he found a handwritten note waiting for him. It was from Jimmy. It said, "Thanks for coming. I'll never stop trying to catch up." Clint smiled as he read it, folded it neatly, and placed it on his desk. Then he looked out the window at the fading light and whispered to himself, "It's not about catching up. It's about staying real." And that's exactly what he always did. Clint finished his last sentence. The studio went completely silent. The cameras were still rolling, the lights were bright, and hundreds of people were staring at him in disbelief. For a man who had built his image around calm confidence, that moment showed why people still called him a legend. He hadn't raised his voice, hadn't insulted anyone, but somehow, his words carried more power than all the jokes thrown his way that night. Jimmy Kimmel, sitting across from him, blinked a few times as if trying to figure out what had just happened. He opened his mouth to say something, then paused, realizing anything he said might make things worse. Clint leaned back in his chair, resting his hands calmly on his knees, and gave that familiar half-smile that everyone recognized from his movies. It was the kind of expression that said, "I've been around too long to be shaken by this." The audience didn't know what to do at first. A few people laughed nervously. Then someone started clapping. Within seconds, the entire crowd was cheering. The sound filled the room. It wasn't the usual kind of laugh you heard on talk shows. It was louder, more real, like people knew they had just witnessed something special. Jimmy forced a smile, trying to recover his usual charm. "Well," he said with a shaky laugh, "I guess I asked for that." Clint turned his head slowly toward him. "Yeah," he said softly, "you kinda did." The crowd burst into laughter again, and even Jimmy had to laugh that time. It was clear Clint wasn't angry. He was simply having fun, and that made it even better. He wasn't trying to embarrass anyone. He was just proving that confidence, when mixed with humor, could disarm anyone. For the next few minutes, the energy in the studio shifted completely. The earlier tension disappeared, replaced by lighthearted amusement. Jimmy tried asking another question, something safer about Clint's recent work, but the audience was still buzzing from what they had just seen. Clint answered politely, adding a few dry jokes here and there, and each time he did, the audience loved it. Jimmy finally said, "You know, I've had a lot of guests on this show, but I don't think anyone has ever made me feel this nervous before." Clint chuckled. "Don't be nervous, son," he said. "You're doing fine. Just don't pick a fight with an old cowboy next time." The laughter came again, louder than before. Even the cameramen couldn't hold back their smiles. Behind the scenes, the producers were whispering frantically into their headsets, telling each other not to cut to commercial yet. They knew they were getting pure gold. It wasn't scripted, and that made it real. Everyone could feel that something genuine was happening on live television. Jimmy took a sip of his water, trying to collect himself. "You know, you've been in this business longer than most of us have been alive," he said. "What keeps you going? What makes you still show up, still make movies, still do interviews like this?" Clint looked thoughtful for a moment. "I just like working," he said. "When you stop doing what you love, you start fading away. And besides, it's fun, even nights like this." The crowd laughed again, but this time the laughter was warm, respectful. There was something about the way he said it that made people feel inspired. It wasn't just about show business, it was about life. Jimmy nodded, suddenly more serious. "That's a good answer," he said. "And you're right. I think we forget that sometimes." Clint leaned slightly forward, his voice calm but clear. "You know, when you've lived a long life, you learn that people will always have something to say about you. They'll joke, they'll criticize, they'll praise you one day and forget you the next. But if you can laugh through it and keep doing what you believe in, none of it really matters." The room went quiet again. But this time it wasn't awkward. It was powerful. The audience was listening closely. Even Jimmy seemed moved. "That's actually kind of beautiful," Jimmy said. "And I feel like you just gave me the kind of advice my dad would give me." Clint smiled. "Well, I guess that makes me the old man in the room." The crowd laughed again, and the tension broke in the best way. It was one of those moments that showed why people admired Clint Eastwood so much. He wasn't just a movie star. He was someone who had lived through decades of success, criticism, and change, and still managed to stay grounded. As the conversation continued, Jimmy relaxed. He started to enjoy himself again. "You know," he said, "when you walked in, I wasn't sure what kind of Clint Eastwood we were going to get tonight. The serious one, the mysterious one, or the funny one. Turns out we got all three," Clint chuckled. "That's a package deal," he said. The audience clapped, and Jimmy smiled again, this time genuinely. He could feel that the mood had turned completely in Clint's favor. What started as playful teasing had turned into admiration. People weren't just entertained, they were impressed. The next segment of the show included a short clip from Clint's latest film. When the clip ended, Jimmy tried to bring the conversation back to humor. "I have to ask," he said. "You've played so many tough guys in your movies. Do you ever get tired of being called the man with no name or the toughest man alive?" Clint tilted his head slightly. "No," he said. "It's better than being called the man with no talent." The laughter that followed was explosive. Jimmy bent over the desk, laughing hard, while the audience clapped and cheered. Even the band started playing a quick beat to match the rhythm of the laughter. It was one of those perfect moments where everyone in the room felt connected. When the laughter died down, Jimmy said, "You know what? I think you just destroyed me again." Clint smiled. "It's not about destroying, Jimmy, it's just having a little fun." And that summed up the whole night perfectly. It wasn't a fight. It wasn't an argument. It was a rare exchange between two people from different generations. One known for modern humor, the other for timeless cool, and somehow, they met in the middle. The interview ended with a standing ovation. The audience stood up, clapping and cheering as Clint gave a small wave before leaving the stage. Jimmy walked him to the edge of the set, shaking his hand with genuine respect. "Thank you for coming," he said, "and for giving me one of the most memorable nights of my career." Clint nodded. "You're welcome. It's been a good ride." As Clint walked backstage, the producers congratulated each other. They knew the episode was going to go viral. Nothing had been planned, and that's what made it perfect. It was unscripted television at its best. Two personalities clashing, then connecting, all in front of a live audience. Later that night, clips from the show started appearing online. Within hours, the moment where Clint delivered his sharp comebacks was trending everywhere. People couldn't stop talking about how calm and witty he had been. Comment sections were filled with praise. That's how you handle an insult. With class. Clint still has it. Kimmel met his match. By the next morning, major entertainment channels were replaying the clip. Headlines read, "Clint Eastwood leaves Kimmel speechless," and "Hollywood legend shows how it's done." Even people who didn't usually watch late-night TV were sharing the clip on social media, saying things like, "This is what real confidence looks like." Jimmy addressed it again on his show the following night. With a smile, he told the audience, "I think we can all agree Clint Eastwood roasted me better than anyone ever has. And I loved every second of it." The crowd laughed and clapped. It was a classy move. One that showed he could take a joke as well as give one. Clint, meanwhile, didn't say much about it publicly. When asked in a later interview about the viral moment, he just smiled and said, "It was a good conversation. Jimmy's a good guy. We just had a little fun, and that was it. No ego, no drama, just grace." The story became one of those rare TV moments people remembered for years. It reminded everyone why Clint Eastwood was still so respected, not just because of his movies, but because of the way he carried himself. He didn't need to shout, argue, or prove anything. He just spoke with quiet confidence, and that was enough. Behind every laugh that night was something deeper, a reminder that true charisma doesn't come from trying too hard. It comes from being yourself, staying calm when things get uncomfortable, and knowing when to turn seriousness into humor. That night on live television, Clint Eastwood didn't just make people laugh. He reminded them what composure looks like, what charm feels like, and how one person can steal the spotlight simply by being authentic. When the lights went off and the cameras stopped rolling, the days after Clint Eastwood's legendary interview on Jimmy Kimmel Live turned into a whirlwind. News outlets, talk shows, and social media feeds were flooded with clips and discussions about what had happened. People couldn't stop replaying the moments where Clint calmly but sharply responded to Jimmy's teasing, leaving the host momentarily speechless. Some called it television gold, while others said it was a masterclass in wit and composure. Even casual viewers who weren't usually interested in late-night talk shows found themselves watching the clips, sharing them with friends, and commenting about how Clint had managed to be both hilarious and profoundly wise at the same time. There were compilations of his best lines, GIFs of his subtle expressions, and dozens of articles analyzing every move he made during the show. For once, the world seemed to agree on one thing: Clint Eastwood had owned the moment. Despite all the attention, Clint himself remained remarkably unfazed. He didn't watch the trending videos, didn't read the headlines, and didn't care about social media likes or shares. To him, the interview was just another experience, like countless others in his long career. What mattered was that he had been honest, that he had spoken from experience, and that he had, in his own quiet way, made people think and laugh. Still, the impact of that night couldn't be ignored. People began reaching out from all corners of the entertainment world. Directors, actors, and even writers sent messages praising Clint for his quick wit and timeless presence. Many expressed amazement that someone could walk into a room, speak a few simple lines, and completely dominate the conversation without raising their voice or trying too hard. Jimmy Kimmel, for his part, had learned a valuable lesson. He knew he was a skilled host, capable of handling any guest, but Clint had shown him something different. There was a subtle strength in being understated, in letting words carry their own weight, and in trusting that truth and humor combined could speak louder than rehearsed jokes. Jimmy shared his thoughts with his production team several times. "He doesn't just perform," he said. "He teaches without even trying." I'll never forget it. Producers, staff, and even crew members from the show found themselves retelling the story to friends and family. It became a conversation starter. They described how the room had shifted during the interview, how the audience went from laughter to awe and back again, and how Jimmy, usually so in control, had been momentarily left speechless. That combination of tension, humor, and respect had created a moment that no one would forget. In the weeks that followed, Clint continued his usual routine. He returned to his projects, focusing on scripts, directing, and the occasional acting role. He remained grounded, preferring quiet mornings at home, walks around town, and small gatherings with close friends. When people mentioned the interview to him, he would smile faintly and say something simple like, "It was a fun night," without making it more significant than it was. Even though he downplayed the viral fame, the effects of the night were still spreading. Clips were shared on talk shows, podcasts discussed the interaction, and late-night hosts referenced the event repeatedly. For many people, Clint's calm and confident style became a lesson in how to handle criticism, humor, and attention with grace. He showed that confidence didn't need to be loud, that wisdom didn't need to be forceful, and that humor could be sharp without being mean. Jimmy, now a little wiser from the experience, used the moment to reflect on his own approach to hosting. He realized that sometimes the best way to entertain was to listen, to pause, and to let the guest's energy guide the conversation. He began experimenting with longer, more thoughtful segments, giving his guests room to shine while still keeping the audience engaged. The difference was noticeable, and audiences responded positively. Back in the public eye, Clint's appearance sparked a renewed interest in his work. People revisited his classic films, quoting lines and admiring his performances. Some younger viewers discovered his movies for the first time, inspired by the viral clips from the talk show. Film critics wrote articles analyzing how his calm demeanor and precise delivery had influenced generations of actors and filmmakers. Teachers used the moment as an example of charisma in public speaking, demonstrating how someone could command attention without shouting or exaggerating. Even award shows referenced the interview in subtle ways. Hosts made jokes about Clint's unmatched timing, his sharp humor, and the way he had handled Jimmy Kimmel like a seasoned professional. It wasn't mockery, it was admiration. People recognized that moments like these were rare, that not everyone could balance humor, wit, and dignity so perfectly. Clint himself remained humble throughout. When asked about the attention, he would simply shrug. "It's just talking," he said quietly. "Sometimes people like what you say, sometimes they don't. That's all there is to it." His perspective was refreshing in a world often consumed by ratings, likes, and headlines. It reminded people that authenticity mattered more than performance, and that the quiet, unassuming approach could be just as powerful, if not more, than the loudest voice in the room. The viral clip also left a lasting impact on Jimmy Kimmel. He began speaking more openly about his admiration for Clint. On one episode, he told the audience, "I've interviewed hundreds of people over the years, but Clint Eastwood reminded me what true presence looks like. I walked onto that stage thinking I was in control, and by the end, I realized I was just lucky enough to witness it." The crowd applauded, understanding the rare respect and humility behind those words. Over time, the story of that interview became part of television lore. Entertainment historians cited it as an example of how personality, timing, and authenticity could create unforgettable moments on live television. People studied the footage to see how Clint's pauses, his expressions, and his calm voice contributed to the impact of every word he spoke. Students of communication and performance analyzed it, noting that true influence didn't always come from shouting or grand gestures, but often from subtlety, consistency, and confidence rooted in experience. Meanwhile, Clint's approach to life and work continued to inspire those around him. People noticed that he didn't chase fame or publicity. He didn't seek validation. He simply worked, created, and lived with purpose. Friends and colleagues remarked on how refreshing it was to see someone succeed on their own terms, without needing constant attention or approval. In a world obsessed with instant recognition, Clint's calm demeanor and grounded perspective were like a breath of fresh air. Months later, Jimmy invited Clint to return to the show for a follow-up interview, this time in a more relaxed setting. The audience wasn't expecting the same fireworks, but they were curious to see the interaction again. Clint accepted, but only on the condition that the conversation be real. unscripted and focused on life, work, and humor, not just jokes or media stunts. When the follow-up aired, the chemistry between them was evident. Jimmy joked gently, but Clint responded with his usual calm wit. The audience laughed and applauded, but there was also a sense of respect that filled the room. It wasn't about one-upmanship anymore. It was about two professionals sharing insights, humor, and human connection. Even years later, people still revisited the original clip. It became a cultural reference point, mentioned in articles, podcasts, and online discussions. Some called it a lesson in poise. Others referred to it as the perfect balance of humor and wisdom. No matter how it was described, the impact was clear. Clint Eastwood's presence and approach to life had left a lasting mark. Jimmy, reflecting on the experience, often said, "That night changed the way I see interviews. It wasn't about being the funniest or smartest person in the room. It was about letting someone's authenticity shine and realizing that real influence comes from calm confidence." Clint, meanwhile, continued living life on his own terms. He didn't pursue the viral fame, didn't comment on trends, and didn't let attention change his behavior. He kept working on films, spending quiet mornings at home and enjoying simple moments that others often overlooked. Yet his influence grew, not through self-promotion, but through the lasting impression he left on everyone who watched, listened, or learned from him. For the audience, the lesson was clear. Laughter and wisdom could coexist. Confidence didn't need to be loud. Authenticity always stood out. And sometimes, the most memorable moments in life weren't planned. They just happened when someone chose to be genuine, calm, and unapologetically themselves. The interview with Jimmy Kimmel became a story people told over and over. New generations of viewers discovered it, teachers showed it in classrooms, and fans revisited it online. It became more than a viral clip. It became a symbol of timeless professionalism, humor, and the power of speaking with honesty and purpose. Even Jimmy himself admitted, more than once, that the night had humbled him in the best possible way. "Clint Eastwood didn't just destroy me on live TV," he said on an interview later. "He reminded me why I started doing this work in the first place. And I think in a way he did that for everyone watching." Clint never sought the praise, but the respect was well-deserved. People admired him not just for his legendary career, but for the way he carried himself, calm, humorous, and completely in control, without ever needing to prove anything. That combination,